After marriage, the only people living in the house were me, my sister-in-law Samina, and my father-in-law. Samina was incredibly beautiful, but strangely, my father-in-law never seemed concerned about getting her married. Every day during the day, Samina would spend several hours inside my father-in-law's room. I used to think she was just being a dutiful daughter, taking care of her elderly father. But one day, I walked into that room unexpectedly, and what I saw made me scream. Before that day, I often wondered why Samina, despite being so beautiful and of age, was still unmarried. It wasn't that there were no suitors, in fact, many proposals came for her, but my father-in-law would always find some excuse to turn them away. Samina was older than me and clearly getting past the ideal age of marriage, yet no one in the family seemed to be taking it seriously. Our household was small, just the three of us. My husband, Akram, had moved abroad to America for 2 years shortly after our wedding. In the beginning, I assumed that maybe Samina's situation was due to the absence of her mother. Perhaps no one had cared enough to plan her future properly. But within a few weeks of living there, I realized that wasn't the case at all. Proposals came regularly, but Samina remained unmarried. And when the real reason behind it began to unfold, I was left completely shaken. Samina, on the surface, seemed like a kind and gentle soul. She took good care of me and devotedly served her father every day. She would spend hours inside his room while I stayed mostly in mine, thinking what a selfless daughter she was, dedicating her life to serving her father while other girls her age were married and living happily with their husbands. I used to wonder whether Samina secretly dreamed of having a family of her own, but I never found the courage to bring up the topic with her, afraid I might hurt her feelings. Our home was a small apartment with only 3 rooms, one for me, one for Samina, and one for my father-in-law. There wasn't much housework either. I would do some light chores around the house, and Samina always helped without being asked. Once done, she'd retreat into her father's room again. Because they spent so much time together, I often felt awkward joining them. I mostly stayed in my room, either chatting with my mother on the phone or waiting for Akram's call. My marriage to Akram had been arranged by my father-in-law. He had seen me at a family function and chosen me for his son. My parents agreed because Akram was well settled and came from a wealthy family. My father-in-law himself was a retired government officer and had no shortage of property or wealth. We had a short courtship before eventually getting married. When I first arrived at my in-laws' house after the wedding, I was shocked. I had assumed I was marrying into a wealthy family and would be moving into a grand home. Everyone had told me that Akram and his father were very rich. But instead, it was a small 3-room apartment with a tiny kitchen. On our wedding night, I sat in that small bedroom, dressed as a bride. The entire room was decorated with flowers, and because of the limited space, their fragrance filled the air completely. My heart was pounding with excitement and nervousness. So many emotions were rising in me. My friends had whispered things in my ear before I left, and maybe it was also the effect of the nikah, marriage contract, that had planted tender feelings for Akram deep in my heart. When Akram entered the room, a wave of nervousness washed over me. I felt a chill run through my body. I began nervously twisting my fingers when Akram gently took my hands in his and kissed them softly. When he expressed his love for me, I felt as though my world was now complete. All the voids I once felt had disappeared. That night, Akram showered me with love. He too was lost in the intensity of his emotions. In the intimacy of our first night, all barriers between us vanished. The comfort and safety I felt in Akram's arms made me forget everything else. I had never before felt the touch of a man, and now the one who held me was my lawful husband. I truly believed my life had become a haven of happiness. Akram stayed with me only for a few days after the wedding, but those few days were filled with joy. We explored the entire city together, making memories. With every passing day, my love for him deepened, and he proved time and again that money was never an issue for him. Whatever I desired, even casually, he would fulfill without delay. Those days were so special that I felt my parents had made the perfect choice for me. I would often ask Akram, "If you're so wealthy, why do we live in such a small apartment?" He explained that this place held sentimental value. "It was chosen by my mother, and it's one of her last memories," he said. "That's why I don't want to leave it." He also told me that both he and his father had been ready to move into a bigger home, but Samina, his sister, firmly refused to leave. So they stayed. Time flew by. With Akram around, I never had a single worry. My father-in-law and sister-in-law treated me with so much warmth and care that I never felt alone. But soon the time for Akram's departure arrived, the sons. He had to return to America. My heart was heavy with sorrow. I cried a lot. The thought of spending the next 2 years without him made me feel physically sick. Akram tried to comfort me. He reminded me about the time difference between here and the US and promised to call whenever he could, mostly during his nighttime, which would be daytime here. He assured me we would still talk often, and somehow his words gave me a bit of peace. My father-in-law also comforted me and promised that I'd never feel alone in their care. Akram left, and I remained behind, alone. But my father-in-law and sister-in-law treated me so kindly that they filled the gap Akram had left behind. They ensured I never lacked anything. Sometimes I would long to go back to my parents' home and spend some peaceful time there. My sister-in-law never objected. In fact, she would handle the house alone without any complaint, while I remained busy chatting with Akram over the phone. As soon as the housework was done, Samina would go straight into my father-in-law's room, probably to take care of him. At times, I felt genuinely happy, thinking what a good upbringing my father-in-law had given his daughter. But how could I have known what really happened behind those closed doors? Sometimes what appears on the surface is far from the truth. When I finally saw the reality with my own eyes, it sent shivers down my spine. Not even in my worst dreams could I have imagined such a thing. From the day after my wedding, I noticed how frequently proposals came from my sister-in-law, Samina. Even during our wedding, some guests had inquired about her and later sent proposals for their sons. But strangely, my father-in-law would always find some excuse to reject them. Samina was older than me, much older, but undeniably beautiful. Even at her age, she continued receiving marriage proposals. I often thought about suggesting her hand in marriage for my own brother, but my mother firmly discouraged me. She warned that watasata, reciprocal marriages, were not a wise idea. When I casually mentioned the idea to Akram, he outright rejected it, saying, "We're not planning to marry off Samina anytime soon." I couldn't understand why they were delaying her marriage like this. When I asked Akram again, he said, "If Samina isn't concerned about it, why are you? She's happy and devoted to taking care of our father." I replied, "So are we never going to get her married just because she's serving him? Even Samina must have feelings and dreams like any other girl." This topic would often lead to arguments between us, so eventually I stopped bringing it up. Sometimes Samina would even bring my lunch to my room, and I rarely had to leave it. She completed most of the household chores before I even woke up. At times, I felt amazed at my own good fortune. I barely had to do any work after marriage. My in-laws were so kind and supportive that even my family back home would envy my situation. The weather had begun to change, and a stifling heat hung in the air. I always felt uneasy in such humidity, and in that small apartment, it was becoming unbearable. I paced around my room for a while, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. When I couldn't take it anymore, I thought, perhaps chatting with Samina would help distract me. With that thought, I stepped out of my room, but Samina wasn't in hers. I assumed she must be in my father-in-law's room, as usual. At first, I considered going back to my own room, but I felt too emotionally weighed down. So I decided to go into my father-in-law's room. But the moment I opened the door, a loud scream escaped from my mouth. My father-in-law suffered from a few chronic illnesses, and Samina was always the one who took care of his medication. She never missed a dose. It was her responsibility to get his prescriptions filled from the doctor as well. I had often admired her for her dedication. Even before I got married, she had managed the house single-handedly, and nothing changed after I moved in. She continued to bear all the responsibilities just the same. Every morning, just after breakfast, she would arrange his medications neatly on a tray, bring it to him, and feed him each pill with her own hands, and now I finally understood why all those medicines were being given. When I entered my father-in-law's room, I saw something that made me scream in horror. My sister-in-law was sitting on the sofa with a stranger, and the state in which they were with each other was too shameful to describe. Meanwhile, my father-in-law was lying unconscious on the bed, completely unresponsive, even to my loud scream. I was frozen in fear. Samina rushed over and quickly covered my mouth with her hand. That unknown man, whoever he was, slipped out of the room so silently that I didn't even realize when he disappeared. Samina dragged me to my room and shut the door to my father-in-law's room. I stood there in complete shock, unable to comprehend what I had just witnessed. She sat me down on the bed and sat beside me, tears pouring down her face. "Bobby, please don't tell anyone about what you just saw," she begged. I was stunned and asked, "What are you doing, Samina? What is going on?" She took a deep breath and said, "I'll tell you everything, the whole truth. But please don't say a word to Akram." Then she revealed something I had never imagined. Samina told me that my father-in-law was not her real father. Her mother was his second wife, and Samina was the daughter from her mother's first marriage. Samina's mother was a wealthy woman, and my father-in-law had married her only because of her wealth and property. Samina had been just a little orphan girl when her biological father passed away. Seeing the opportunity, my father-in-law, then a modest government officer, trapped Samina's mother into marrying him with sweet words and charm. After their marriage, he treated Samina's mother so affectionately that she became completely detached from her daughter. He had purposely distanced the mother and daughter to ensure that Samina would never get close to her mom, a tactic to gain full control over the property. Samina said that eventually, even she began to resent her mother, unaware of the manipulation happening behind the scenes. When her mother tried to approach her, Samina would avoid her. Akram, who was older than Samina and the biological son of my father-in-law's first wife, also treated Samina badly, harsh words, cold behavior, always making her feel inferior. All this emotional abuse deeply scarred her, and she developed intense feelings of inadequacy. But the real tragedy began when her mother suddenly became bedridden. The doctor said her organs were slowly shutting down. Samina told me with trembling lips that she knew, without any doubt, her mother had been slowly poisoned, and she also knew who was behind it. But she couldn't do anything because she was powerless in that house. Despite the emotional distance she had maintained, Samina said, "In the end, she was still my mother." When the final days came, she stayed by her side day and night, refusing to leave even for a moment. Her stepfather tried everything to keep her away, but she wouldn't budge. She was certain her mother had been deliberately and slowly killed. Samina witnessed her once healthy mother wither away within months, right before her eyes. And then came the moment that shattered my father-in-law's plans. He thought he would now inherit all the wealth, but his world turned upside down when her mother's lawyer arrived with documents. The entire estate had been transferred to Samina's name, with the clause that she would receive full ownership after marriage. Until then, my stepfather was granted the authority to manage the estate. But I knew very well that he would never let me get married because if I did, he would lose control over everything. I wasn't greedy for the property, but the pain of losing my mother had taken root deep in my heart. I had inherited my mother's beauty. And as I grew older, suitors began lining up at our doorstep. But how could my greedy, tyrannical stepfather allow me to marry and lose the estate? The same wealth that had financed Akram's expensive foreign degree? That very degree had landed Akram a great job in America. I kept my emotions suppressed for a long time. But no one can bottle up their heart forever. One day, my stepfather was unwell, and I took him to the doctor. That's where I met Assad, businessman. Like most men, he fell for my beauty at first sight. He had brought his mother for a consultation, and during our brief encounter, his mother managed to get my details. A few days later, she came to our home with a marriage proposal for Assad. But I knew this could never happen. I explained it to Assad too. Eventually, Assad and I began speaking over the phone. When he learned the entire truth, he suggested that we get married in secret and reveal it when the time was right. So one day, we seized the opportunity and registered a court marriage. Assad's family knew about it and supported us, but I couldn't tell my stepfather because my mother had written in her will that he would retain legal guardianship over me. And only with his approval could I marry and inherit the estate. I had no desire for wealth, but I couldn't let the same man who murdered my mother keep the property she died for. So I told Assad to wait a little longer. After your wedding, I started giving my stepfather the same medicine he used to give my mother, a sedative that appeared harmless but gradually shut down a person's organs. I kept you confined to your room during that time so I could secretly meet Assad. He's a good man. He didn't even care about the property. He begged me countless times to leave everything and come away with him. But I wanted revenge for my mother. I pushed my stepfather to the brink. Now he could die any day. Since you're in Akram's life, no one will suspect me. You'll vouch that I was a devoted daughter caring for her ailing father. I've planned this all very carefully. When my stepfather was unconscious, I'd call Assad over. I never brought him to my room. I was afraid you might walk in. But I knew you'd never go into my father's room. Just a few more days now, and this cruel man will leave this world. Then you'll help me marry Assad, and once that happens, Akram will take you with him to America. All of us can finally live our lives in peace. Samina's confession left me stunned. The woman I thought was a dutiful daughter had been orchestrating the death of her stepfather. But deep inside, I couldn't deny that it was her father's abuse and manipulation that had driven her to this point. I had witnessed firsthand how many good marriage proposals he had deliberately rejected. The one thing that gave me solace was knowing that Samina hadn't chosen a sinful path. She had married Assad properly through Nika. She wanted me to remain silent, to let things unfold as planned. After much thought, I don't know why, but I felt sympathy for her. Even if what she was doing was wrong, she had been forced into this path. I told her, "Your brother's call is about to come. Go tend to your father. Let me speak to my husband too." Samina looked at me once and saw in my face that I had agreed to support her. Just 1 week later, my father-in-law passed away. And the following week, I myself dressed my sweet sister-in-law as a bride and sent her off with Assad. My husband Akram began preparing my paperwork so I could soon join him in America. He didn't even return to the country for his father's final rites. Sometimes I would wonder, if my father-in-law hadn't killed my mother-in-law out of greed for wealth, perhaps his own life would have turned out far happier. I had heard that my mother-in-law was even more kind-hearted than my sister-in-law, Samina, who herself was such a gentle soul. But in chasing property and riches, my father-in-law gambled away every relationship he had. And in the end, not even his own son found it necessary to return for his final farewell. Only 3 people carried the truth of what had happened: Samina, Assad, and me. And that secret was now buried deep in our hearts forever. Assad truly was a wonderful man. He filled Samina's life with the love and joy she had always deserved. I had moved to America, but Samina would still call me regularly to ask how I was doing. Akram never once asked what had really happened to his father. Perhaps it was the result of the kind of upbringing he had received, funded by the inheritance of an orphaned girl. That day, I made a silent promise to myself. I would raise my own children on what is pure and earned through honesty, so that in their hearts the value of relationships and the fear of God may always remain alive.